All right, moving right along. The next type of diagram we'll cover is called the Entity Relationship Diagram, or ER diagram for short. This kind of diagram depicts entities, which are essentially things, and the relationships between them, along with attributes of those entities and relationships. We use them extensively in business analysis, primarily as a way to start thinking of modeling data. You can't really understand what they are before you see it. So let's take a look at the building blocks of an ER diagram and then assemble one together. We'll actually make a very small model for Udemy, which I think we're all familiar with enough. Entities are the first component of any ER diagram, and they're represented by rectangles like this. As with just about any shape you see in diagramming, we have entered some text into it to show what the entity represents. By convention, the name of the entity is a noun, and it's also singular in number. This doesn't mean that you can only have one. Indeed, Udemy has loads of courses. It's just the convention that we use. ER diagrams also have relationships, and they're represented by diamond shapes. There's an example. Just as you would expect, we also place text in the diamond shape that represents the type of relationship. Now, here's a rule of ER diagrams. A relationship is always between two entities, two rectangles. So let's put together our first picture that actually makes any sense. Great. Okay. Great. Here we have a user entity studying a course entity. And that's coincidentally what you're doing right now. However, there is one missing piece in this diagram in order for it to be well formed. And that is what we call cardinality. Let's display that on the screen and then talk about it. Okay. So you'll notice that there is now an M next to the user entity and an N next to the course entity. Okay, what do these mean? In this case, it means, in short, that any number of users can study any number of courses. The M and N are simply variables that represent any whole number from 0 to infinity. There are a couple other variants that we can put in here as well. We can make the N a 1, and that would mean that a course can be studied by any number of users, but a single user can only study one course. Alternatively, we can make the M a 1, and that would represent that there is only one user, but she can study any number of courses. Generally, we have three different types of relationships. We have one-to-one relationships, one-to-many relationships, and many-to-many relationships. One-to-one relationships are when there is a single instance of one entity, which has a relationship to a single instance of another entity. One-to-many relationships are when there's a single instance of an entity, which can have a relationship with many instances of another entity. And many-to-many relationships are when there are many instances of an entity that are related to many instances of another entity. That's a mouthful. All right. Since there are many users of Udemy, and Udemy has many courses available, and since users can study as many courses as they like, this relationship is considered many-to-many. Let's illustrate this by adding another relationship between these two entities, like this. Okay. Here we have a teaches relationship. That's new. Because instructors are also users. Here I've made this a one-to-many relationship using the assumption that only one instructor can teach any particular course. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but let's just make that assumption for purposes of this model. I realize that getting cardinality right can be challenging, so I'll give you a heuristic for it, a rule of thumb. When you have two entities, like user and course, that are joined by a studies relationship, ask yourself these questions. Can a user study multiple courses or only one? If it's multiple, then we want to put an N next to the course. If it's only one, put a 1 next to the course. Second, Can a course be studied by multiple users or only one? If it's multiple, then put an M next to user. If only one, put a 1 next to user. And that's how we ended up with the cardinality rules that are in this diagram. There is one more attribute that we commonly place in ER diagrams, and those are, well, they're called attributes. They are essentially descriptions of, you can think of them as adjectives. They're attributes of an entity or of a relationship. And we represent them with ovals like this. And we put the name of the attribute inside the oval shape, and then we connect them to whatever entity or attribute they are an attribute of. And here is an example of tying the whole diagram together. Okay, great. So in this diagram, we have the user entity on the left, having the attributes of first name, last name, and email. And we have the course entity on the right, having the attributes of title, description, and category. And then the rest of that diagram we already covered. Besides cardinality, I think the other common point of confusion that new BAs encounter is, when is something an attribute of an entity, and when is it an entity of its own? Well, let's take a look at that title attribute of the course entity as an example. The way that I think of the title is that it's just text. So somewhere in Udemy's systems, any course has a simple string of text associated with it that is called its title. There just isn't anything more to know about the title of a course than the title itself. And for that reason, I consider it to be an attribute. On the other hand, let's say that we realize that, courses also have lectures associated with them. We also know that lectures have a lot of attributes themselves, such as a title and a time duration and probably other stuff. Well, we also know that lectures are watched by users, right? So that's a new relationship that we have to think about. All this complex description means that lectures should be an entity in their own right, and by the way, we would diagram them like this. All right, so you'll notice that we added a lecture entity in the top right. It has the attributes title and duration. The lecture entity has a one-to-many has relationship with course, meaning that a course can have n number of lectures, but a lecture can only belong to one course. And it also has a many-to-many watches relationship with the entity user. So that means that M users can watch n lectures. So any number of users can watch any number of lectures. And that's pretty much the ER diagram. It's funny, I actually used to hate these, but just in the course of lecturing about them, I've come to love them again. So as you age in your BA career, you'll probably experience the same kind of thing yourself, but I hope that you'll love ER diagrams as much as I do.